Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Chaf Tes Amud Aleph, 29a of Meseches Megillah. We're starting from the Mishnah, 4 lines from the bottom of the page. And this Mishnah is going to discuss the 4 parshas, the Daled Parshios, the special parshios that we read in the month of Adar and surrounding that. And the Mishnah will tell us what they are. Now, we read those parshas as the maftir. So we read the regular parsha of the week, and then we read these additional sections as the maftir, and then the haftorah will be connected to the maftir usually. But we'll see that there's different opinions about whether that's the way it should be done, but that's how we do it. That's how we paskin. So says the Mishnah, Rosh Chodesh Adar shechal yos b'Shabbos. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, Korin b'Parsha Shkalim. You'll read Parsha Shkalim on Rosh Chodesh itself. Parsha Shkalim is the first of the 4 parshas, and the Gemara will talk about what it's about. Chalios b'toch HaShabbos. If Rosh Chodesh falls out in the middle of the week, not on Shabbos, but in the middle of the week, so then Makdiming l'sha'avar. So then you'll read Parsha Shkalim the week before. So Parsha Shkalim is read either the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh Adar, or if Rosh Chodesh Adar is a Shabbos, if the first of Adar is on Shabbos, so then you read Parsha Shkalim on that Shabbos. But you never read Parsha Shkalim after Rosh Chodesh Adar. So it's read on Rosh Chodesh Adar or the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. Umafsikin l'Shabbos acheres. And then, in the case where you read it before, you have a break of a Shabbos. In other words, we're about to read that the next Shabbos, the next of the 4 parshas is Parsha Zachar, which is read before Purim. So if Rosh Chodesh Adar is on a Shabbos, so then that would be Parsha Shkalim, and Parsha Zachar I think would be the next Shabbos. There would be no break, because the next Shabbos would be the Shabbos before Purim. But if Rosh Chodesh Adar is in the middle of the week, and Parsha Shkalim is the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh, so then there's going to be another Shabbos after Rosh Chodesh that's just nothing, because it's no special Parsha, because Parsha Zachar won't be until the following week. Fine. Mafsikin l'Shabbos acher. So then you'll have a break of a Shabbos where there's no special Parsha. B'Shniya, now the second week, the second of the special parshas is Zachar. That's Parsha Zachar, and that's read the Shabbos before Purim, which in the case where Rosh Chodesh, as we just mentioned, if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, then you read Shkalim on Rosh Chodesh Adar, then that would be the first week, and the next week, the second week, would already be Parsha Zachar, but in any event, Parsha Zachar is always the Shabbos before Purim. And the reason for that is Parsha Zachar is about remembering to destroy Amalek. It's the end of Parshas Kiseitze, remembering to wipe out Amalek, and remember what Amalek did to us, and remembering to wipe them out. And that connects to Purim, where Haman was a descendant of Amalek, and there was again a attempt by Amalek to destroy us, and us destroying them. B'shlish is Paraduma. The third week, the third Shabbos in Adar, the third of the 3 parshas, which is going to be the third Shabbos in Adar, is Parshas Paraduma. So, what we call Parshas Para. And it's from the beginning of Parshas Chukas, and it deals with the laws of preparing the Paraduma, the red heifer, whose ashes are used to purify someone. And that's read now because it's leading up to Pesach, although it's still Adar now, but it's leading up to Pesach. And in order to bring the Karban Pesach, you had to be purified from Tumas Meis, from the spiritual impurity of being in contact with the dead. That's done with the ashes of the red heifer, so we read Parshas Para in preparation for that. And then, B'Revius, the 4th Shabbos in Adar, is HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. That is Parshas HaChodesh, which tells us how to sanctify the new month, and also talks about the Karban Pesach, and that's read the last Shabbos in Adar, the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It could also, I believe, fall out on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Okay. B'chamishis, the fifth parsha, the fifth week, chozer l'kasidron. Then you just go back to the regular order, and you don't have any special parsha. Fine. What is it that we're going back to? What were we switching? So like I said, we switched the maftir, and now we would go back to a regular maftir, is what it would mean. Or potentially, if it meant that they read this parsha instead of the weekly parsha, then it would mean we would go back to the regular parsha. Now, lakol mafsikin, says the Mishnah, we stop the regular laning for all things. And what's the list of all things? B'Rosh Chadashim, b'Chanukah, u'v'Purim, b'Tanyos, u'v'Mamados, u'v'Yom Kippurim. We stop for Rosh Chodesh, for Chanukah, for Purim, for a fast day, and for the Ma'amados. The Ma'amados were the special gatherings that were done in different cities, corresponding to the bringing of karbanos. There were designated turns that different places would take to be the corresponding like daveners for a karban, and they would have a special Kriyas HaTorah, and it was read from Parshas Bereishis, and on Yom Kippur. So now it doesn't mention other Yom Tov; it only mentions Yom Kippur. So Tosfos explains what we're talking about here is either weekday laning or Shabbos Mincha, and it's saying that we replace the weekday laning or the Shabbos Mincha laning, which is usually the weekly parsha, 3 aliyahs of the weekly parsha, or 1 divided into 3, and on these days we replace it with another laning. So on Rosh Chodesh, on Chanukah, Purim, fast days, those are all weekdays. Rosh Chodesh could be a Shabbos, but it could be a weekday too. And even if it's a Monday or Thursday, where we usually lane the weekly parsha, they get replaced by these things. Same thing with the Ma'amados, where they read from Bereishis, and Yom Kippur at Mincha time. Meaning, even if Yom Kippur falls out on a Shabbos, we don't read the weekly parsha, we read the reading of Yom Kippur. All other holidays that come out on Shabbos, so Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, Pesach, we would read the Shabbos laning at Mincha. There's no special laning at Mincha for those days. That's why they're not mentioned. Okay. Tanai Hassam, we're learning a Mishnah. Be'echad be'adar mashmi'in al ashkalim. On the first of Adar, they would announce that people should bring their shkalim to the Beis HaMikdash. So, ve'ala kilayim. And they would also announce about kilayim, about mixed bread, interbred plants that are forbidden. So they would announce about looking out for that. So, what do we mean they would announce for shkalim? We mean that they would announce that people should bring their donations. Everybody had to donate shkalim, 1.5 shkalim to the Beis HaMikdash, or a half shekel. There's different shkalim were for different things, and they would make the announcement on the first of Adar. Now it's time to bring your half a shekel. So that was announced the first of Adar, and they would also announce to look out for kilayim, to look out for plants that are growing together. Bishlam al kilayim. The Gemara says, I understand that they would announce kilayim at that time, Dizman Zriyahi, because that's the time of planting. Tosha says we don't really mean it's time of planting, but it means it's the time when the plants are sprouting out, and you can see if any plants grew together and they're forbidden, and you uproot them. So I understand that in the other time makes sense, the beginning, just as the spring is starting to unfold. Ela al shkalim, no, but why are we announcing that people should bring their shkalim on the first of Adar? Where do we learn that from? What's the idea of bringing shkalim, and why now? So Amar Rabbi Tavi, Amar Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Tavi says the name of Rabbi Yoshia, de Amar Kra, because the Torah says, Zos olas chodesh b'chodsho. With regards to, actually the Rosh Chodesh offering, but it's true, it's going to teach us about all karbanos tzibur, all public offerings. It says this is the olas chodesh, this is the olah, the elevation offering of Rosh Chodesh, bichadsho, in its renewal. Amra Torah, so the Gemara Darshans, Gemara understands that word to mean that it's teaching us, the Torah is telling us, chadesh vehave karban. You should renew and bring a karban, meaning, bichad, showing its newness, that the karbanos of this karban that it's talking about in this pasuk has to come from a new collection, which, and the Gemara elsewhere teaches us that this is talking about Nisan. So the karbanos that start from Nisan, or starting from Nisan, is a new cycle of karbanos for the year, all the public offerings, and they are to be brought from the new collection. So karbanos tzibur, public offerings, need to be public. Everybody has to contribute to them. That's the half shekel that everybody's going to bring to contribute to the public offerings. And for a given year, you have to bring the offerings from the donations of that year. So the cycle begins at Nisan, which means that leading up to Nisan, you have to collect the money. So on the first of Adar, they will announce, everybody bring your shkalim for the collection for the karbanos. Right? Since in Nisan you have to bring the karbanos using the new donations, so we go back and we read and we announce on the first of Adar that people should bring their shkalim. That people bring their shkalim to the Beis HaMikdash. So we read Parsha Shkalim at the beginning of Adar, either the first of Adar or the Shabbos before the first of Adar, to announce to people to bring their shkalim to the Beis HaMikdash. Ask the Gemara Kiman, whose opinion is this going like? Delo Reb Shimon Gamliel. It's apparently not like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. De'ir Reb Shimon Gamliel, because if it was going like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, ha'amar shtei Shabbosos. He says that 2 Shabbos is before is enough. You don't have to go a whole month before Nisan. 2 weeks before would suffice. How do we see that? D'Tanya, because the Brisa says, that we begin to ask and to discuss the laws of Pesach 30 days before the holiday. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer Shtei Shabbosos. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says no, 2 weeks before. So it seems that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel doesn't require as much time to prepare. The Tanna Kama, the first opinion, said you need a month to prepare for Pesach, and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says 2 weeks. And so we are assuming that he would say the same thing about when to bring the shkalim. That it's enough to tell people to bring their shkalim 2 weeks before. Says the Gemara now. Afilu tema Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. It could be that even Rabbi Shimon Gamliel would agree that you need to make the announcement a month before, the first of Adar already, or before. And that's when you have to read Parsha Shkalim. Why? Since the master said, since everybody seems to agree that the shulchanos, the money changers who are going to exchange the silver shkalim that need to be brought, so they're going to provide them, I guess. I assume we mean they would provide silver shkalim to people in exchange for prutos, for smaller coins, in order that people can bring silver shkalim. So they start to sit from the 15th of Adar in the Medina, outside of Yerushalayim. And on the 25th of Adar, they move closer to the Beis HaMikdash. They sit in the Beis HaMikdash, apparently, in the courtyard, I guess, in the outer parts of the Beis HaMikdash, which means it's really crunch time. You know, we're only working close to the Beis HaMikdash now, and if you don't bring now, the Beis Din is going to have to send their people after you. So that means that the start of the process is the 15th of Adar, because that's when the shulchanos, that's when the money changers have to get set up. So you need to tell them 2 weeks before. So mishum shulchanos kavim v'kriyam. So you could say that already because of the shulchanos, because of the money changers, you have to start already from Rosh Chodesh Adar. So since Rabbi Shimon Gamliel would agree that the money changers are set up already on the 15th of Adar. And yes, he holds that you need only 2 weeks to prepare, but you need to start preparing 2 weeks before the money changers get set up, because that's part of the process. So 2 weeks before is the beginning of Adar. So he would agree that you read Parsha Shkalim and you announce that people should bring their Shkalim already at the beginning of Adar, perhaps. Now, my Parsha Shkalim. What is the Parsha Shkalim? What do we read to announce that people should bring their Shkalim? Rav Amar Savas B'nei Yisrael Amar Tali Hemes Karbani Lachmi. Rav says that you read the Parsha of the Tamid, of the daily offering. Command the children of Israel and say to them, my Karban. So you read the Parsha of the daily offering, which was a Karban Sibor, a public offering, the main thing that you're collecting for. Ushmuel Amar Kisisa. Shmuel says read from Parshas Kisisa. By the way, the Tzavas B'nai Yisrael is from Parshas Pinchas, which is in Sefer Bamidbar. And Shmuel says read from Kisisa, which is in Sefer Shmos. What does it say in Kisisa? It says, when you count the children of Israel, everyone should bring half a shekel, a shekel. And he says it's a truma Hashem, it's a donation to Hashem. So you read about bringing your half shekel. Okay. So Rav says you read Tzavas B'nai Yisrael, command the children of Israel about the Karban Tamid, the daily offering, and Shmuel says you read Kisisa about bringing a half shekel. So Bishlam Amand Amar Kisisa Haida Takari La Parsha Shkalim. So it makes sense. If you read Kisisa, it makes sense the name Parsha Shkalim because you're reading about T'chsiv Shkalim. It says should bring machzas a shekel, b'shekel hakodesh. It says bring a half a shekel. But if you say like the opinion of Rav, that you read about the Karban Tamid, Hacham Yishkalim Ksivi Hasam, does it say anything about Shkalim there? It doesn't say anything about Shkalim. So why would you call it Parsha Shkalim? So, says the Gemara in. It says, yes, it does in a certain sense say something about Shkalim, because what does it say? Taimamai Kadir B'Tavi. Because what's the whole reason that we read Parsha Shkalim now? We said earlier, like Rabbi Tavi said, because in Nisan, you need to start from using the new Shkalim, the new donations. So, in Nisan you need to start using the new donations, and that's learned from the pasuk that we brought before, Zos Oes Chodesh B'Chadsho, which is a pasuk in the context of the Rosh Chodesh offering, but that's actually part of the same parsha. It's the following paragraph or so after the Karban Tamid. So it's all the same parsha, it's all the same section. So the section of Tzavas B'nai Yisrael as Karbani Lachmi that Rav says to read is relevant to Shkalim, because it's from there that we derive that you need to use new Shkalim, new donations, beginning in Nisan. And that's why you're reading it now in the beginning of Adar. Okay. Bishlam Adamar Tzavas B'nai Yisrael Mishum Dechsivi Karbanos Hasam Kadir B'Tavi. Now, it makes sense that this is related to this time of year and to bringing your shkalim for the karbanos, right? The shkalim that we're talking about is the collection for the karbanos. So, according to the opinion of Rav that we're reading Tzavas B'nai Yisrael, we're reading about the karbanos tzibur, the public offerings that the money is being collected for. So, it makes sense to read that now, beginning of Adar, because that's what we're collecting for. Elamandamar Kisisa, but if you say like Shmuel that we read from the beginning of Parshas Kisisa, which by the way is what we do, but if you say like that, Karbanos Miksivi, does it say anything about collecting money for Karbanos there? Shkalim Ladanim Ksivi. The half shekel that's being collected there, first of all, it's to count the people, and what's it going to be used for? It's going to be used to make the Adanim, to make the brackets that hold the pillars of the Mishkan. But it's not a collection for Karbanos. So yes, it's a collection of half shkalim, but it's not the same collection. So why would we read that at the beginning of Adar when we're talking about bringing half shkalim for the karbanos? So the Gemara says, Kiddutangi Rav Yosef. No, it's like what Rav Yosef taught us. Shalosh Truma saying. It actually mentions in the beginning of Kisisa the word Truma 3 times. And Rav Yosef says, it teaches us there's 3 different donations of half shkalim. Shal Mizbeach HaMizbeach, Shal Adonim LaAdonim, Shal Bedek HaBayis LaBedek HaBayis. There's a half shekel for the Mizbeach, meaning for the Karbanos Tzibur, for the public offerings. That's what we're talking about here. And that's why it is relevant. That's the answer to our question. It is relevant, because there's a reference there. There's a hint, at least, an allusion to the Truma, the donation for the Karbanos. Vishal Adanim, and then there's the half shekel for Adanim, for the silver brackets of the Mishkan, which is more explicit. Vishal Bedek HaBayis LeBedek HaBayis. And then this isn't necessarily half shekel, this is whatever anybody wants to bring for the Bedek HaBayis. Bedek HaBayis is the upkeep of the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. So that's the 3rd Truma there. So therefore, since there is an allusion to the collection for the Karbanos, then it is relevant to read this at the beginning of Adar when we are announcing the collection for Karbanos. Bishlam Amad Amar Kisisa Hainu Deshani Hayrosh Chodesh Mishai Rashi Chadashim. Now in the case where Shkalim falls out on Rosh Chodesh Adar, which was the first case of the Mishnah, it said to read Parsha Shkalim. So if you say that Parsha Shkalim is Parsha Kisisa, so then you're reading something different than if it was just Rosh Chodesh, a different Rosh Chodesh. El Madam or Tzavis Karbani. But if you say, like Rav, that you're reading Tzavis Bnei Yisrael's Karbani Lachmi, you're reading from that reading of Parshas Pinchas, my Shani, how is this different than any other Rosh Chodesh? That is the reading of Rosh Chodesh. So we're saying if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, so then you read Shkalim on that Shabbos, because it's the Rosh Chodesh Adar. You read Parsha Shkalim. So if Parsha Shkalim is Kisisa, then it's telling me something, because it's a different laning. You read Kisisa instead of the Rosh Chodesh reading. But if Parsha Shkalim is Tzavis B'nai Yisrael is from Parshas Pinchas, that's also the Rosh Chodesh reading. So it's not any different. Gemara says, Shani, it would be different. Di'ilu Rashi Chadashim Karu Shisa Bin Yama Diyoma V'chad B'Rosh Chodesh. Because if it was just a regular Rosh Chodesh, you would have 6 people have read from the weekly Torah portion, and the 7th would read, in Yama Diyoma would read Rosh Chodesh. Would read, would Chad Rosh Chodesh. And the 7th Aliyah would be about Rosh Chodesh. V'ilu ha'idna. But now that it's Parsha Shkalim, what we're saying is, according to this opinion, Kulu b'd Rosh Chodesh, you only read from Rosh Chodesh, all 7 weeks. You don't read the weekly Parsha. This is assuming that Parsha Shkalim knocks away the weekly Parsha. So we're saying if it was just a regular Rosh Chodesh, you would read the weekly Parsha, and then you would read Rosh Chodesh as the maftir. Here it says as Shvi, but potentially as the maftir. But in this case, this opinion saying, it's Parsha Shkalim overrides the weekly Parsha, and you just read Parsha Shkalim. So you would just read the Parsha of Tzavis B'nai Yisrael, which is the Rosh Chodesh reading, which is the Parsha Shkalim reading. Now, so that makes sense if you hold that during these 4 weeks you don't read the regular Parsha, and when the Mishnah said that Chozrin l'Kesidron, it meant you go back to the weekly Parsha after that. For these 4 weeks you don't read the weekly Parsha, and then you go back to it. So if that's how you understand the Mishnah, then fine, you could say this explanation that the way that, according to Rav, who holds that Shkalim is the same reading as Rosh Chodesh, the way this is different than a regular Rosh Chodesh of Shabbos is that now it's taking over. That's if you hold that it takes over. However, but according to the opinion that you just go back to reading the Haftorah, you were reading the regular Parsha. This was just the Maftir. And the Haftorah changed. And And now it's saying you go back to the regular Haftorah, or the regular Maftir. So then, what are you going to say? Uparsha de Yoma Karinan. If you say that we still were reading the regular Parsha, Mai Shani. So then how is this any different? If you hold that you read the regular Parsha, then, and you hold like Rav, that Shkalim is the reading of Rosh Chodesh, then how is Rosh Chodesh Adar different than any other Rosh Chodesh? You'll read the regular Parsha, and then you'll read Rosh Chodesh as the Maftir. Where's Parsha Shkalim? There's nothing special about it. Says the Gemara, Shani, no, it's still different. Dilu Rashi Chadashim Karu Shisa Binyan Diyama V'chad Kari B'd Rosh Chodesh. On a regular Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, what you would do is you have 6 aliyahs of the regular Parsha and 1 of Rosh Chodesh. Ve'ilu ha'idna. But now, like it's Parsha Shkalim, Karu Tlasa Binyan Diyama V'arba Karu B'd Rosh Chodesh. What you would do is you would have only 3 aliyahs from the regular Parsha, and you would have 4 from Parshas HaChodesh, from Rosh Chodesh. So now the opposite, you have 4 from the regular Parsha and 3 from Rosh Chodesh, but you would split it more evenly. That's what you do. That's how it's different. A regular Rosh Chodesh on Shabbos, you read 6 aliyahs of the regular Parsha and 1 of Rosh Chodesh. But if it's Parsha Shkalim, then it gets split. 3 or 4 aliyahs from the regular Parsha, and then the last 3 or 4 aliyahs from Rosh Chodesh. Okay. Meisveh. Now we ask a contradiction though from the Brisa. The Brisa says Rosh Chodesh Adar Shechalios b'Shabbos, Karim b'Parsha Shkalim, U'maftirim b'Yehoyada HaKohen. So if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, we read Parsha Shkalim. So far that's the same as the Mishnah. But then it says that the Maftir, the Haftorah, is from Yehoyada HaKohen. So now this Yehoyada HaKohen is in Malachim Beis. Bishlam Laman Damar Kisisa. So it makes sense if you hold that Parsha Shkalim is Kisisa, Haina de Maftirim b'Yehoyada HaKohen. Then it makes sense to read that as the Maftir from the story of Yehoyada HaKohen. Didamile, because it's related to Kisisa. Dichsev, because in this Haftorah it says Kesef Nafshus Arko, that each person will bring money for, according to themselves. Kesef Nafshus Arko, which is similar to Kofer Nafsho. Everybody's bringing, which it says in Kisisa, everybody's bringing a half shekel corresponding to themselves. So that makes sense. If Kisisa is the Parsha Shkalim, it makes sense that this is the Maftir. But if you say that Shkalim is the Parsha of Tzavos Bnei Yisrael, the Parsha of the Karban Tamid, the daily offering, and the Rosh Chodesh reading, Mi Dami, is this in any way related? Why are you reading from this Haftorah? Says Gemara, yeah, Dami could Rabbi Tavi. We go back again to Rabbi Tavi. Rabbi Tavi said that the source for starting from the new collection in Nisan is from the Parsha of Rosh Chodesh, Olas Chodesh B'Chadsho, and so and that's Parsha Shkalim, or it could be at least according to Rav. So we read Parsha Shkalim, we read from that Parsha. We learn that you need to start a new collection. You need to bring karbanos from the new collection. It's starting from Nisan, and therefore we want to announce that in Nisan, in the beginning of Adar, and so we read that, and then we read the Haftorah that mentions bringing your shkalim, bringing your donations. So it is related. Okay. Meisvei, we have another contradiction from the Brisa. It says Chalios beParshas Muchala. Let's say Parsha Shkalim falls out a week that's right next to a Parsha that's right next to it. Whether before or whether after it. Karanosa, Vikoflanosa. We'll read it one week and then we'll read it again the next week. So, if Shkalim falls out in a week that's adjacent to it, to that same parsha, we'll read it again the following week. Now, how does that work? So, Bishlam Olamanda Amar Kisisa, if you say that Shkalim is Kisisa, so Adar time, you're reading the parshas right around Kisisa. So it's very common that this happens, that you read from, let's say, it's Tetzaveh, Parsha Shkalim, and then the week after is Kisisa. So Parshas Tetzaveh, you'll read Shkalim as well, which is Kisisa, and then the next week you'll read Kisisa. And that's not uncommon. So that makes sense if Shkalim is Kisisa, that you could talk about a case that they come one after the other, which is what this Bryce is addressing. But if you say that Shkalim is from Tzav, which is from Tzavas Karvani, which is from Parshas Pinchas, so Mimas Rami Bahuzimna, does Pinchas ever come out in Adar? It never does. It's much later. Adar time, you're dealing with Truma Tzav Kisisa, Mayakal. Those are the Parshas. You're not dealing with Parshas Pinchas at all. So how can you have a case where Pinchas comes out a week before or a week after Parshas Shkalim? So the Gemara says, no, it is possible. With Neymar Rava, it's possible for the people of the west of Eretz Yisrael because the minhag then was that they had a 3-year cycle for Torah reading, and therefore you could have that. It could come out that Parshas Shkalim, Parshas Pinchas, is being read around Adar time because it's a different cycle, and it could be that this brisa holds like that. Okay, Tanya Kavasei Shmuel. Now we have a brisa that supports the opinion of Shmuel, which is that Parshas Shkalim is Parshas Kisisa. Again, the beginning of Parshas Kisisa. Rosh Chodesh Adar Shechal Yos B'Shabbos. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, Karan Kisisa. You read from Kisisa. Maftir and B'Yo Yada Kohen. And the Maftir is from Yo Yada Kohen from Melachim Aleph, Melachim Beis, Parak Yud Beis, chapter 12. So you have explicit brisa like Shmuel that Shkalim is Kisisa. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, there's still the brisa. Rosh Chodesh Adar Shechal Yos B'Shabbos. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, Motziin Shalosh Taros. You take out 3 Sifrei Torah. V'karan b'hang echad b'yom hashayam. Now the first one you read the weekly parsha, wherever it is. Ve'echad b'shal Rosh Chodesh. The second one you read Rosh Chodesh, reading from Parshas Pinchas. Ve'echad b'kisisa, and one of them you read from Kisisa, which is Parshas Shkalim. Ve'amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. And Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha also said, I take it back, I don't think he was a Tan, I think it was a Gemara, so it would not be, there's not the brisa anymore, I think. When he said further, Rosh Chodesh Teves Shechal Yos B'Shabbos. If the first of Teves falls on Shabbos, now the first of Teves is always the middle of Chanukah. Chanukah is the 25th of Kislev. So if Rosh Chodesh Teves falls on Shabbos, so there also you have 3 Torah readings. You have the weekly reading, you have Rosh Chodesh reading, you have Chanukah reading. So the same thing, Mevi'in Shalosh Toros V'Karim Bahen. You take out 3 Torahs and you read them Echad Ben Yom Shal Yom. One of them you read the weekly parsha, usually Miketz. Ve'echad b'd Rosh Chodesh, and one of them you read Rosh Chodesh. Ve'echad b'Chanukah, and one of them you read the reading for Chanukah, which is from the beginning, from Parshas Naso, the dedication of the base of the Mishkan. Utzricha. Now it was necessary for Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha to tell me this halacha, both in the context of Parshas Shkalim and in the parsha and the context of Chanukah. Meaning, you might have said, why didn't you tell me both? Just tell me one, I'll figure out the other. But no, he needed to tell me both. Di'itmar baha, because if he only said it about Chanukah, so behakam Rabbi Yitzchak, you would say he only says it about Chanukah. Aval behach kirav. But maybe with regards to Shkalim, he didn't say because he held it wasn't relevant. Because he holds like Rav, Damar Parshas Shkalim is Karbani Lachmi. Rav holds that Shkalim is Karbani Lachmi, which means it's the same reading as Rosh Chodesh, Uvishay Torah Sagi. And 2 Torahs are enough. In other words, according to Rav, you don't have this issue when it comes to Shkalim, because Shkalim is Rosh Chodesh, so even if Rosh Chodesh Adar is Ar and Shabbos, you only need 2 Torahs, one for the weekly parsha and one for Rosh Chodesh, but you don't need one for Kisisa, because Shkalim is not Kisisa. So the only time you have 3 Torahs would be on Chanukah. Kamash Malan, that's why Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha had to say it specifically by Shkalim as well, teach you that he holds like Shmuel that that shkalim is kisisa. So v'lei mahav v'lo bayahach. So then just say about shkalim and don't bother saying it about Chanukah. Why is there something I would have thought different about Chanukah? Gemara says, you're right. But he just went from one to the other, and it is superfluous, but once he was mentioning one, he mentioned the other. Okay. Itmar. It was said, Rosh Chodesh Teves Shechal Yos Bechol. If the first of Teves falls out on the weekday, so now we're talking about Chanukah now, and it's Rosh Chodesh and it's Chanukah. So we have two Torah readings. It's a weekday morning. We have the reading of Rosh Chodesh, we have the reading of Chanukah. So how do you divide it up? So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Karu Tvasa b'Rosh Chodesh v'chad b'Chanukah. So on Rosh Chodesh there's 4 aliyahs. So you have 4 aliyahs to play with. So Rabbi Yitzchak says the first 3 aliyahs should read from Rosh Chodesh, which is Parshas Pinchas. And one of them, the last one, should read from the Parsha of Chanukah from Parshas Naso. V'Rav Dimi de Min Chaifa Amar, Rav Dimi from Chaifa says no. Karu Tvasa b'Chanukah v'chad b'Rosh Chodesh. The opposite, the first 3 should read from Chanukah, and 1 should read from Rosh Chodesh. Amar Bimani, and Rabbi Mani said, Kavasedra b'Yitzchak nafcha mistabra. The first opinion makes sense. Did Tadr B'Shem Tadr Kodem? Because we have a rule, if you have something that's more common and something less common, that which is more common takes precedence. Now what's more common, Rosh Chodesh or Chanukah? Rosh Chodesh happens 12 times a year, Chanukah only happens once a year. So Rosh Chodesh is more common, so therefore it takes precedence. So he says it makes sense that you read 3 from Rosh Chodesh and then you deal with Chanukah, and you'll have 1 aliyah from Chanukah. But Amar Rabbi Yavin says, Kavaseder Rav Dimi Mistabra. No, Rav Dimi makes more sense, who said that you read 3 from Chanukah and 1 from Rosh Chodesh. Why? Because mi garam l'Ravi sheyava. Who caused that there's a 4th aliyah in the first place? Because if it was just Chanukah, there's only 3 aliyahs. It's only on Rosh Chodesh that you have a 4th aliyah. So there's only a 4th aliyah because of Rosh Chodesh. So that 4th aliyah should be Rosh Chodesh. Mi garam l'Ravi sheyava Rosh Chodesh. Who caused that there should be a 4th aliyah? Only Rosh Chodesh. Hilkach Ravi Rosh Chodesh. By Mikri. So the 4th one has to be Rosh Chodesh reading. So therefore the first one should be Chanukah, and the 4th one, which only exists because it's Rosh Chodesh, should have to be from Rosh Chodesh. So we have machlokas. How do you divide up the laning? How do you divide up Torah reading when on Rosh Chodesh Teves, which is a weekday, where it's both Chanukah and Rosh Chodesh. So So what do we conclude about this? Rav Yosef Amar Ein Mashgichim Rosh Chodesh. Rav Yosef says we don't give primacy to Rosh Chodesh, which would mean we read 3 from Chanukah and 1 from Rosh Chodesh. V'Rabba Amar Ein Mashgichim B'Chanukah. Rabba says we don't give primacy to Chanukah, rather to Rosh Chodesh. V'Hilchasa, what is the final halacha? Ein Mashgichim B'Chanukah v'Rosh Chodesh Ikar. That we don't give primacy to Chanukah, we give primacy to Rosh Chodesh, and therefore we read 3 aliyahs from Rosh Chodesh and 1 aliyah from Chanukah. That's what we do when Rosh Chodesh Teves falls out on a weekday. 3 aliyahs of Rosh Chodesh followed by 1 aliyah of Chanukah. We will pick up from here, Be'ezer Hashem, next time.